You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. I have a cold again, and that's what happens when you have a bunch of little kids, right? Age 8, 5, and 2. This household has been like nonstop cold for, like 3 weeks. Wow. Anyway, so my voice is hoarse, but fortunately not for the interview part, which was done earlier. I want to start out by reminding you about a few things. Specifically, make sure you check out wealthformula.com, where you can still get all sorts of useful downloads, including my book, 7 Secrets of Eternal Wealth, which is the #1 bestseller on Amazon, but can be yours for absolutely free as a PDF download. Now, in terms of today's show, this should be a good one. I'm going to read you a quote, which may be somewhat uncharacteristic for this show. Sexual transmutation is the most powerful tool in existence when it comes to creation, invention, accomplishment, creativity, advancement, and achievement. That was a quote from Napolean Hill from Think and Grow Rich. That is one of my favorite books of all time, by the way. And it's funny, though, that there's a chapter in that book that is about this concept of sexual transmutation. And it's the chapter that no one ever talks about in that book. And if you've read the book, you know kind of why. It's a little bit of a weird chapter, right? In the middle of this book, which is probably the most mimicked self-help books in history. I mean, in fact, I remember watching this movie called The Secret, right? And it was like a big thing back in the 90s. And when I read this book, they were talking about that secret in this book. And this was written back like in the 20s or 30s. Anyway, totally ripped off. Every self-help book rips off from this book. But let's get back to this concept of sexual transmutation. So in this chapter, in a nutshell, Napoleon Hill says that what he's really saying is that harnessing sexual energy is the most powerful and efficient means of accomplishing our platonic goals. That's really what he's saying, okay? And it took me a little while to understand what he meant. But, I think I get it now, and this is how I interpret it. So if you've ever been a teenage boy, or maybe you have one, who knows, there's a period of time, for the most part, where little else seems to matter other than teenage girls. And, I actually used to be a teenage boy myself hundreds of years ago, and I certainly remember that phase. And I'm not talking about necessarily anything seedy. What I'm saying is that there's a certain part of your life or time in your life when it seems like you're just obsessed, right? There's really nothing else you can think about other than in my case, girls. Of course, most people eventually find a little bit of a balance with these thoughts and other important details in life. Other people don't, by the way, and that's a source of other problems altogether. However, it is hard to argue, isn't it, that there's anything more powerful than that kind of obsession? So now for a second, hold on to that feeling of obsession that I'm talking about, that teenage boy stuff. And then for a second, take the whole sexual reference out of the equation altogether, right? And what are you left with? Well, have you ever been so obsessed with something in your life that you can't stop thinking about it? You may certainly be one of those people. I know I have been. When I was a kid growing up in Minnesota, for example, ice hockey was on my mind all the time. And had it not been, for a career-ending back injury, I probably would have played college hockey, and who knows how far I could have gone. But one thing's for sure, I was obsessed. And the funny thing was that by Minnesota standards, I started playing organized hockey a little late. I was 9 years old. And in Minnesota, usually that's about 5 years too late. I mean, usually you start to skate and then you learn to walk after that. Well, I was 8 or 9 years old, and when I first started playing hockey and I started skating, I couldn't even stop. So that was kind of a problem for me because, I would skate and I would be moving what used to be pretty quickly for me, and then I had no way to stop. So eventually I would run into something and fall down. But 4 years later, I went from really the worst guy in the park league, which is like, anybody can get in the park league, to one of the best guys on one of the state's best teams. How'd I do it? Well, I was obsessed. I ate, breathed, and slept hockey. That's what I did. And that made up for a lot of my other shortcomings. And over the years, I've had similar obsessions at times in my life. For example, when I decided I wanted to be a doctor, I suddenly just got this crazy obsession with how I was going to get into med school. And I remember the application process and thinking about it all the time, the MCATs and all that, and how you're going to do great. I mean, I was obsessed. And then finally, as an entrepreneur, of course, that's my life now. And I have been obsessed with the creation of various business throughout my career now. And the successful ones are the ones that I have at one point or another had sort of this obsession with. The one thing that drives obsession of all kind is the desire for some kind of accomplishment. So let's go back to the sexual transmutation thing. Well, when it comes to teenage boys and that kind of obsession, we know what that accomplishment is, but for the entrepreneur, it's something very different. The most successful entrepreneurs that I know are not, in fact, driven by money. They are driven by the idea of creating something out of nothing and seeing it come to life. Money is just a way to keep score. That's an important point, right? Because a lot of people who enter entrepreneurship or become entrepreneurs because they want to make a lot of money, a lot of times fail because they're obsessing about the scorecard, not how to win the game, right? And the game itself. So again, the idea of creating something out of nothing and seeing it come to life is really the entrepreneurial spirit, right? Money is just a way to keep score. Now, I use the example of entrepreneurship here, but it really applies to just about anything in life. I mean, Napoleon Hill's sexual transmutation chapter is really nothing more than a reference to the power of being obsessed with something. And think about it, Olympic athletes, world-class chess players, musicians, you name it. They aren't half-assing stuff, right? They are not, they are quintessentially obsessed, and it's the highest achievers in the world who harness that obsessive energy to do extraordinary things. That's what Napoleon Hill was talking about. So my guest on this week's Wealth Formula podcast, he's perfect for this topic. He's a kindred soul. He is as much of a raging entrepreneur as I am, and he's one of the most interesting people I've ever met. So when we come back, we'll talk to Jorge Newberry of American Homeowner Preservation.
Are you having a hard time finding great investment properties? Unfortunately, the best deals are rarely found locally. Successful investing begins with the right properties in the right markets. Norada Real Estate provides everything you need to invest in the best deals across the United States. Our simple, proven system will help you create real wealth and passive monthly cash flow. Learn how to find the best deals by downloading your free copy of The Ultimate Guide to Passive Real Estate Investing at noradarealestate.com. That's NORADA realestate.com.
There is no excuse for lazy money or lazy retirement money. After all, it grows tax-free. With Impact Housing, you can invest with a team that has a strong track record of making investors money through value-add strategies of neglected apartment buildings nationwide. The Real Estate Crowdfunding Review just named Impact Housing to their top 14 real estate investing sites for non-accredited investors and gave industry honors to it for most experienced sponsor and most socially conscious. Put your retirement money to work with an investment in Impact Housing. Head over to impacthousing.com. Again, that's impacthousing.com. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest is a friend of the show who's now making his
third appearance in Wealth Formula Podcast. That is a first for anybody. It is a longtime friend of the show, Jorge Newberry, who most people know from American Homeowner Preservation. And George, welcome back to the show. I mean, I'm super excited. You've been with us from the beginning.
I appreciate that, Buck, that warm introduction. I had no idea that I was setting records today, though, so that's great to hear. Too bad it's not yet an Olympic sport, but maybe one day.
Well, we're coming upon the 100th show, so if you think about it, you're making up 3% of the shows. That's pretty impressive, right? One of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about today, George, is that, obviously we'll get to American Homeowner Preservation, all of what you're currently doing, including this great course that's coming up. But I wanted to really talk to you today about the entrepreneurial spirit, because when I go back and I think about you and your book, Burn Zones, by the way, you can still get a free copy of that on wealthformula.com if you go there. George will send you a free copy. But what strikes me is you are as entrepreneurial as anybody I know. And what drives you? Well, first of all, why don't you talk a little bit of what I'm alluding to? Because this goes way back to when you're a teenager, right? Or even before that.
Even before that, I always I'd be hiking with my dad, and when I was a kid, and I'd always be thinking about businesses. And I got my first paper out at 7, and then I actually ended up doing both the 2 local papers. I ended up delivering them both, and that was 7 years old. I did that for a few years, and then I bought this ice cream tricycle, which seems like, there's a picture of it in Burn Zone, so people can actually see what it looks like. It was fairly elaborate, and I'd go around, pedal it around the neighborhood and sell ice cream, like ice cream sandwiches, snow cones, stuff like that, and go to high school football games, and made money that way. And that was, I was probably between 10 or 11 and 13, and then when I was 14, I started a record company. And so all these things, they were just like ideas, but I was my mind would kind of run wild. And then I would say, well, I always figured that, I could do anything anyone else could. So, and if it's some lofty goal, then I just have to take a little step, and then another little step, and then another little step. And by doing that, eventually you hit the big goal. You stay focused, determined, and optimistic more than anything, and that usually will help me achieve what I've wanted, with one big exception, as you'll read in Burn Zones. There was one time, no matter what I did, I just couldn't win, and that kind of brought me down. But up until that point, I had this extraordinary string of success, and it wasn't that everything I touched turned to gold. Some of them weren't so easy, and I ended up, I just had to work extra hard to make them a success, even when things weren't going as expected.
So one of the things that strikes me about this whole thing, and it still continues to be the case today, is it hasn't really been, entrepreneurship hasn't been, the driving force behind it wasn't making money. Of course, that's something that is in your mind. But as a kid, is that what you were thinking initially? Was it all, just driven by wanting to make money, or was there something else even back then?
No, I don't know why, but it's never really, money was a way to keep score, to actually prove that what
That's
I did
right.
was a success, and show other people, hey, or just show myself, hey, I made money doing this, and that was just a measure. But the reality was just, it's always been the challenge, and the chase has been more, and maybe this isn't a good thing necessarily. That's been the allure. Hey, the journey's fun, and let me take something. I'm often gravitating towards stuff that it's not easy. The likelihood of me accomplishing it in most people's minds would not be great, and so the path will not be a straight, an easy path. It'll probably be a more difficult path where I'm pivoting, and this just the actual achievement or accomplishment of achieving whatever that goal, which seems to outsiders may have been unlikely. That's been more the draw than anything, to prove I can do it.
So you know what this reminds me of, which I've kind of thought about this with you before, is that sometimes I wonder about this because, as you know, I'm kind of, I share that entrepreneurial spirit with you, and my CPA describes me as a raging entrepreneur or a flaming entrepreneur or whatever. And one of the things that makes me think is like how much of this is genetic, right? And when I think about you, a curious thing about you and your name is that, Jorge Newberry is also the name of an airport in Argentina, correct?
It is, absolutely. He's my great, and I'm going to mess it up. The proper term is in burn zones, but I think he's my great granduncle, if I'm not mistaken. And he's a a national hero in Argentina in sports and aviation. He was a pioneer, and he would push the envelope. He really tried to do some extraordinary things. In fact, they called him Mr. Courage, Spanish, of course, because he would take extraordinary risks. And this is to my, this spirit or genes, whatever it is, isn't a complete blessing at all. There's a dark side, I guess, to it, in that he died during a ballooning accident. And I've made a lot of money, but I also lost it all and had some really challenging years as a result of that. So it's not sometimes you say, God, wouldn't it have been easier just to either do a more modest business, not always shoot for the fences, but sometimes swing for the just take some singles or doubles once in a while, and maybe life would be a little bit easier. But I agree with you that I think some people are genetically coded that they want to have to constantly challenge themselves. And certainly my great-granduncle was one of those people, and he perished as a result. But he had a legendary life. And then, you and me, I think we're similarly blessed or afflicted. I'm not sure. It depends on people's perspective.
You're so right. And that's just what again, resonates with your story for me is that, you've said a few things here that I think I just want to really hit hard again. One is that it's either a blessing or a curse, who knows, but it just is, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of people like the idea of being an entrepreneur. The reality is it's something like you either are or you aren't. Now, I will say that it took me personally a little bit of while to discover that I was one, because I never really had, I went the traditional route. I became a physician. But then a spirit just took over in me, and it was just something I couldn't resist. It's just who I am. Now, when I go back and I think about some of my doctor friends, they're living comfortably, and they're, they don't have these moments where 70% of the time they're like, oh, shoot, oh, shoot, oh, shoot. And then, once in a while they go, oh, yeah, right. Uh-huh. That seems like a very comfortable way to live. But that's just not me, right? And so that's affliction in many ways that I think entrepreneurs share, right? I mean, that's what you're talking about. It's not that you want to do this, it's just who you are.
Yeah, and you just find different outlets to do it.
Right.
I mean, it could be, I could be doing mortgages, but I could be doing stocks, or I could be selling cars. You're going to find a way to kind of figure out the business and then try to find a way to innovate and do it better, or find some other product or service that you can do the same with. I mean, certainly you can ask our wives, and I imagine they may say, at times this is definitely a curse.
Oh, yeah.
Because this, it's not, and I can't speak for you, but I can speak for myself. My wife, the number one thing she asks for me is time, and I haven't been great. She knew what she was getting into, but I want to do better, and I really am making strides. And this is the first business, AHP, where it's 10 years old, so that's a long time for me in one business where it's really been my focus, and I think the results have shown it, but also. And I don't know if I've shared much of this with you, but I'm actually stepping aside as a CEO in the next March 5th.
So let's talk about American homeowner preservation again. And, we've talked about this many times on the show before, and obviously I mention it on pretty much every show. Just a quick review on what American homeowner preservation does. And you might even include, since we're talking about it, how you kind of got into this thing and where it's come to.
Sure. As some of you know, when you read in my, as you certainly know about, and you read in Burn Zones, I had a pretty good sized portfolio of apartments, about 4,000 apartments across the country in 2004. when an ice storm hit my biggest property and triggered this extraordinary sequence of events, which left me penniless. I lost everything and $26 million in debt. And that was, 2005, 2006. And, I was looking for something, a way to rebuild myself. And, even at that point, I considered getting a job. But I said, okay, well, I had an idea. I started hearing about, the mortgage crisis that was just starting to make the headlines. And I thought, hey, maybe I can share what I learned being a debtor with so much debt and that experience. Maybe I can help other families who are going through the same thing. So I helped start a nonprofit called American Homeowner Preservation, and our mission was to help families at risk of foreclosure stay in their homes. But then, we worked, and thousands of families came to us, and we helped some, but not as many as we'd like, mostly because the servicers and the banks weren't very receptive to solutions that made a lot of sense. For instance, a family would want to stay in their home and, apply to Ocwen to do a modification, and they may have owed $100 and the home was worth $50 because it had dropped in value, but Ocwen would take them sometimes a year or two to process the modification request, and ultimately they come back and say, hey, you're not approved, and then they'd kick the family out. But what was notable and striking for us was, once they kick the family out, the home gets vandalized, and then they sell for $25,000, and we said, hey, we're witnessing destruction of value, which is to no one's benefit. The homeowners are losing, the investors are losing. Yeah. It didn't make sense. So we said, hey, we're going to start buying these loans. And that's what we did. And we kind of found a better way to do this. And eventually it's evolved into our current iteration where we crowdfund, anyone can invest with us. We crowdfund the monies that are used to buy these loans as little as $100. Yeah. And anyone in non-accredited and accredited investors are welcome. And that's it's gone very well. We've grown larger and larger to the point where now, I think the constraint to our growth at this point is me. Yeah. And it's a, kind of revelation 6 months ago. I'm the one that's been working the hardest and had the vision and executed it. But right now, if I want AHP to be the next Ocwen, to be an institutional company that's traded on a public stock exchange, how do I get there? Because I think we have a great concept, we have a great strategy, but we need to build it. And I one thing I failed at is really being a great team builder and team leader. I think I do okay at it, and I've gotten better at it. But as the team's grown, I just don't capture all their effort.
That's another like classic entrepreneurial thing, right? I mean, and I have a similar issue. I mean, to the extent that like you grow something to a certain size and it's a tremendous success, and at that point you're like, what do you do from here? Well, at this point, I'm not really a world-class operator. What I am is a good entrepreneur and an idea guy, a vision guy. And it's really hard for some of us to pull those things apart, because I think that's why a lot of small business entrepreneurs end up failing, because they can't let go, right? Mm-hmm. That's where Robert Kiyosaki talks about the S quadrant, right? And obviously you're way beyond sort of just a small business operator, but it's like part of the curse is not understanding, or as Robert Kiyosaki once sang when he was describing this, nobody does it better, right? That's what he described the small business person, the self-employed person, because you have to understand that you have a certain talent, a superpower, and at some point, if you want to go to the next level, you need a different skill set to plug in, right?
And very few people have both skill sets, so you need to take yours out and put someone else's in.
Yep,
and
exactly.
It's really hard to come to that realization, but I came to it because a friend of mine had the exact same situation, and he said, hey, hi, the CEO, and all of a sudden all the employees were happy, they were contributing more, and it's like he waved a magic wand. So I said, okay, I'm going to do the same thing. Because otherwise, this company is going to, I'm going to be working crazy hours for the rest of my life, and the company, it's not going to get where it could grow. And so I'm stepping aside, and I have hired a CEO who comes from a publicly traded servicer and has done a extraordinary job building the team there. And and she's going to join March 5th, and it's going to be a big transition because actually she doesn't want it. She wants to be number one. She's number two where she's at. She wants to be number one, undisputed, and so she doesn't even want me part of the day-to-day operations. I could do the transition, and then I'm pretty much going to meet with her once a week. It's going to be a really, I have to really trust her, which I do, and but it's hard to let go. It's like a kid that I've raised, and now I'm saying, okay, I've taught you everything I can, but now I have to hand you off to someone who can teach you a lot more than I can.
Yeah. Luckily for me, too, I have a person like that who's taken over my Chicago businesses, and it is, once you can really trust it, it's really liberating. But one of the challenges that you have in this situation is, again, you have a certain spirit, and you have a certain ethos, and you have to make sure that person can continue with that and really stand for your values and what you're all about, right? That's been one of the hardest parts.
Oh, to find the right person was really tough. We and this was the first time I did this correctly, because usually I'm a fairly fast to hire, which is like completely what you're not supposed to do, but there's usually some urgent need, so I hire somebody in a hurry. So here I did it really slow. We did 4 or 5 regular interviews. We did a personality profile, a behavioral interview. We went to dinner with her and her significant other, and we did this with actually a few people, a few candidates. Some of them didn't get as far down the road as others, but it was really interesting. And you see some candidates who at the outset you say, well, this is like the perfect candidate, and but then you get further down the road and you say, oh, maybe they're not so good. And it was really the fact that it was a 3-month-long process, and you actually saw multiple people going down the same process. The leader or the winner emerged and made absolutely the most sense that this is the right person. So I'm confident that we made the right choice, and now it's a matter for her to execute and prove that the choice was the right one.
Yeah. So where does that leave Jorge Newberry? I mean, what's next?
So this transition will take a couple of months, and then I'm still guiding at high level. We have a lot of, we're becoming a servicer, which I think is a huge step and a wise one.
Explain what that means, because I think a lot of people
Sure,
don't know what that means.
Good question. So mortgage servicers, basically, many a times people think, I make my payments to someone like Aquin or Bank of America or Wells Fargo, and that is right, but they're not necessarily the person or the entity that owns the loan. Many a times they're simply servicing it and collecting a monthly fee, and the money actually goes to some third-party entity that really holds the mortgage. And in AHP's case, we're the mortgage holder, but we have to contract with third-party servicers today to execute our strategies. And it's always a slight disconnect because they do it for 95% of their clients, they do it one way, and then for AHP, they do it a different way. And that's always been imperfect. And so now we're going to not only service our loans in this way, which is basically collect payments, work out resolutions, approve modifications, things like that. But we're going to do it for others, for other companies, other individual investors, whoever wants to service it in a socially responsible manner, which we've proven actually generates better returns than doing it in the typically socially irresponsible manner that most servicers act in. That's what we're looking to do.
So you found an inefficiency in the system, and that's basically a business, right?
It's an opportunity.
Yeah.
And this is a classic entrepreneur. This is a classic entrepreneurial move, and I'm sure you'll appreciate it.
It absolutely is, right?
But look at this. Because of a lot of servicers, the smaller ones are closing down or consolidating because they see big risks in the market. The CFPB has been very, very aggressive on compliance. So if you're not good, your record keeping is not great, or your compliance isn't up to snuff, you're going to get a fine, and the fines are in some cases millions of dollars. So it's just, some people are just being put out of business because of the fines. Others are saying the threat of fines, and they're saying, well, we're going to have to upgrade our technology, our compliance department, better to shut down or sell out. And so when everybody else is running away from an opportunity or from a business, then what does an entrepreneur do?
Right.
They run right towards it. And it's just like when everybody's buying real estate, like today, it may not be the optimum time to buy, but the crash of 2009, 10, 11, when people were running away from real estate, it was probably an ideal time to buy. And that crash environment will return at some point.
Sure.
But same thing here. Everyone runs away from servicing, then it creates the opportunity, and I think that's something we're trying to seize.
Yeah. So AHP becomes less of your focus. In fact, it becomes sort of more of a high-level vision thing, and then now we focus on the servicing world. One of the things that I like about you is the social ethos, and one of the reasons why, despite the fact that there are now a lot of note buyer companies and funds, that you're the only one I've ever invested with, and you're the only one I've ever really promoted actively, because I really believe in your what you're doing. But what's interesting to me is that Jorge Newberry and AHP always had a special sauce that made this happen. And unlike Coca-Cola, unlike Kentucky Fried Chicken and the Colonel, you're going to release this special sauce, right? So tell us about that, because this is, I have to admit, I'm really excited about, learning this too. But tell us about the event.
Sure. So this is one time only. This is basically my last day of day-to-day operations at AHP is April 17th. So April 18th and 19th, I'm going to share everything I've learned over the last 10 years. I'm inviting all the people that I've worked with, in any significant capacity over the last 10 years to join us and share their knowledge. And in fact, Buck, you're coming. And we are going to show people how to buy notes, make a financial profit, but also have a positive social impact. And the two are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're very, you win financially, you can definitely win socially for the family, and create some pretty financially transformative solutions for both parties, for the investor and the homeowners. And this is something that we've iterated over the last 10 years, and I think it's become formulaic. But again, like I mentioned, these servicers, 95% of their clients go to use an old, outdated playbook, at least in our mind, and then we use this new playbook, which we think is better for all parties, and that's what we want to share. And so we're going to go step by step through. If you decided to buy a loan, how are you going to find the sellers, and how much do you pay? What kind of due diligence do you do? Taxes, servicing, recording. How do you raise capital if you grow, beyond the capital that you have on hand? These are all things where people need to know. When I learned, it was very much trial and error, and we certainly made some mistakes. And we probably were blessed with the fact that we started buying, during the crisis. So our mistakes, we did okay because we bought the loan so cheap.
Yeah.
And now it's a little tighter and a little more competitive. So if you make a mistake, it can be more costly. But that's what we want to do. We want to inspire and train a new generation of note buyers who can do this in a socially responsible manner, but are still going to be driven. It needs to make sense. And that's one of the reasons we're no longer a nonprofit. You can really scale things when you're doing a good thing, but you're also making a profit.
Right.
Then it becomes, hey, this thing can really scale. So that's what we're looking forward to doing.
So is your goal? Are you going to make this thing? The idea here is, if you go to this 2-day event, that you hopefully should be able to come out and potentially start literally, taking action right away.
Absolutely. In fact, at the event, we're going to have loans that are for sale, and and you don't have to buy them, but you can choose to buy them. And during the course, we're going to probably give everybody a loan, at least a portion of the course, give them a loan, which they can then run through the due diligence. And so actually they're kind of underwriting or reviewing that loan. And at the end of the course, they decide, hey, I'm going to buy this, or I'm not going to buy it. And just to make sure that everybody feels like, hey, I'm getting a really competitive price before the event, we're going to put these loans out for sale to all the regular sellers that we deal with, and we'll also have some other probably sellers that participate, all the other buyers, I should say, institutional and private parties, and we'll say what they bid. And the people that come to the course, we're going to share, here was the high bid, and then maybe do a little background kind of reverse engineering and see how those bidders came up with those bids, and then they could simply match that bid. Or if there's multiple people want the loan, then they could outbid each other until they come to a price that they want to pay. But we don't want to have, sometimes we see a new buyer overpays, and we want anyone who comes to the course, if they buy a note now or at the course or in the months after, we want them to succeed and become bigger note buyers and clients of HP Servicing, ideally. And the only way they're going to do that is if they succeed early on. If they buy a couple loans, they lose, then that's kind of the end. They'll move on to something else. Yeah. So we want to set people up for success.
So, if I'm listening to this and I don't know you, and I do know you, and I understand why you're doing this, part of me's thinking, if I don't know you, I'm thinking, why would this guy want to set up an entire, new group of competitors to my business? How do you answer that?
Oh, easy. This problem, so I'll look from a social perspective, this problem is much, much greater than HP could ever have enough money to buy it. And so I'm not naive saying, oh, we'll just buy everything. We'll own the market. It's not that way. And HP Servicing, ideally, we can scale huge as a servicer. And so I'm certainly inviting everybody who buys loans to service through us. I think we'll be priced competitively, and our performance will be much better than the competition. But that's why I'm building future clients of HP Servicing. And the opportunities, there's people who come to the event may have a relationship or a contact who has, pools of loans that we don't know about, that we may never have contact with. So I'm not even going to think that we're going to own the market. Also, today, it's a pretty strong real estate market. So there are loans available, and most of it's the overhang from the last crash. But there'll be another crash based on historic real estate cycles that'll happen in the next year, 2 years, 3 years. At some point, there's another crash, and then there's another huge opportunity for people to buy mortgages. So I want people to know how to do this, to buy these mortgages. We can provide the servicing, but they'll find these opportunities. There'll be people at the event who can sell you loans, who can connect you with loans, and just those relationships. I want to build a new ecosystem, and ultimately HP Servicing's in the hub of it, but everybody else is levering off of it and making money and delivering transformative solutions for families at the same time.
This is really exciting to be George. And first of all, I also just want to mention George was kind enough to invite me to be on a panel, really I'm going there because I am super excited to learn this business. This is just an incredible opportunity to learn from, somebody who I think is an incredible entrepreneur, highest level of ethics, and who's actually shown that he's got, a business model that works. Now, so if let me ask you another question. So how much money do I got to have? Right? Because I might be thinking, well, yeah, shoot, George is, raising millions of bucks and all that. I'm not going to be able to do that. I've got maybe, $50,000 a year to play with, or maybe $100,000. Is it worth coming out if you're in that?
Absolutely. We just sold a loan today for $27,000, and that's not even the low end. That's mid to low. We do sell individual loans, and we buy individual loans for $5,000, $10,000. So there's definitely some opportunities at the very low level. One thing I have to say, though, I have to caution your listeners is this isn't, hey, I'm going to buy 5 and make 5, or put out 20 and make 40. You will have those results upon occasion, but you also have other ones where you make $5,000, $10,000, you do some work for it, and you'll lose occasionally. So I'd encourage people to buy a handful of loans. So maybe they're spending 50 or 100, but they're buying 5 or 8 loans or something like that, just so you mitigate the risk. Because if you buy one and it's a loser, that's not going to feel so good. If you buy 8 and 6 or 7 win and the other 2 lose, you'll still make some money in all likelihood. And, that's going to be something where you say, hey, I made a return. Let me keep going. The next time I'm going to do 10 or 20 and keep growing. I really want to, I went down this path myself without any guidance, no training. I just figured it out, asked people questions wherever I could, went to conferences, but nothing was speaking directly to me as a new note buyer. That's what I want. So this is, whether you're new or whether you're experienced, you're going to learn things here from from the very beginnings on up to how do we crowdfund capital? What do you need to do that? Because ultimately, if we can inspire some note buyers who get as big as us, those are going to be great clients for us. And so we're going to open everything we've learned. We're going to have our attorney there who does our crowdfunding. He's going to be on a panel sharing, here's how you crowdfund capital. Here's how you market to investors. We're going to share all that because I think it's important and valuable. And some of the people that are on some of the panels are going to be, I think, learning from some of the other panelists in terms of some of the notes buyers, existing funds that we do business with every day and sell loans to us. They want to learn, how do we crowdfund this capital? Because many of them want to do it as well, and that's great. We want to show them how to do that just as much as we want to show other people how to buy notes and scale their businesses.
Yeah, and to your point, the reason George has got me on a panel is not because I know anything about this business. I know as little as most people out there. I want to go and learn. But George, I think George is, I do raise money, and I've had some success doing that. And I think George's idea was to get me on there as, how do you potentially go out and raise money and the marketing aspect of that, which I'm happy to share. By the way, I want to make sure before we go that, George, with American Homeowner Preservation, right now we're at that point where it's still delivering 12%. That's going to change. Can you tell us a little bit about that in case people want to get some money in there before
it changes?
Yeah.
Sure. No, I appreciate you bringing that up. So American Homeowner Preservation, right now we're raising capital into our 2015 A-plus fund, which will be open until May 24th of this year, so another few months. And once it closes, the next fund that we offer will be at 10%. We're working on the submission to the SEC right now, but that's going to be submitted at a 10% annual return, as opposed to 12%. But just to be clear, everyone who's in the 2015 A+ who invests now or on May 24th, that money will continue to earn up to the 12% that it always has paid. And
that's that fund will be open and paying for about at least 2 years or something like that?
Yeah, it's a 5-year fund. So
okay.
for the next, they put their money in it, it'll be up there. It'll be in there for as long as 5 years.
Fantastic. Well, listen, again, this is called the Note Buyer Bootcamp. And if you want to go, which I strongly encourage you to do, I'm going to be there. It's April 18th and 19th in Chicago. Where are you doing it? Do you know yet?
Sure. It's at 440 South LaSalle. It's in it's One Financial Place. It's the same building as the Chicago Stock Exchange.
Oh, really? Cool. I haven't actually been inside of that building.
Yeah, it's nice.
So I will be doing a homecoming. It'll be the first time I'm coming back to Chicago since my move, just for the event. And we'll have a Wealth Formula event there that hopefully George will also join us at. If
nice.
You want to go to this, folks, you go to wealthformula.com and click on the icon. There is a coupon. I believe it's a $200 off coupon for the Note Buyer Bootcamp. And make sure you go. This is, a lot of people ask me all the time about ways that they can get involved with investments on their own. And listen, maybe this is for you, maybe it's not, but this is one of the better opportunities I've seen in a long time, because I know George, and George is not some BS artist who hasn't done it, who has a course on how to do it. You see that all the time, all right? George is not that guy. So if you want to learn from somebody who really knows what they're doing, check that out. George, thanks so much for being on Wealth Formula Podcast again.
I really appreciate it, Buck.
We'll be right back. What do the Rothschilds, the Romneys, and the billionaire hedge fund managers know that you don't about growing and protecting wealth? As you might imagine, the wealthy have a few tricks up their sleeves. One strategy allows you to grow wealth tax-free at a compounding rate with no volatility. It protects your money from creditors and lawsuits, and it lets you invest the same money in 2 different places at the same time. How about that for amplifying wealth? To learn more, go to wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com. Hey, it's Buck Joffrey. You know how I feel about the stock market. So what would it take for me to invest in the S&P 500? Well, You'd have to minimize fees. You'd have to give me most of the upside of the market and none of the downside. That's right, I don't like losing money. You'd have to let me leverage my gains so that I could amplify my returns, and you'd have to let my money grow tax-free. Think I'm crazy, right? Guess what? I found a strategy that does exactly this and more. It's called Velocity Plus, and it's available to you if you make at least $100,000 per year. To learn more about this life-changing and mind-boggling strategy, go to wealthformulabanking.com. Again, that's wealthformulabanking.com.
Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. You know, I really liked that Jorge Newberry. And by the way, if you have not invested in his fund yet, American Homeowner Preservation, check that out, ahpfunding.com. And you should consider it now if you're going to, because again, as George mentioned, that 12% preferred rate is about to disappear. Now, I also want to encourage you to make it out to the Note Buyer Bootcamp on April 18th and 19th, and we will make sure to have some kind of wealth formula gathering somewhere there in Chicago. That should be a lot of fun. It will be my first time back to Chicago since moving Santa Barbara. And so that's going to be kind of exciting for me. I love Chicago. I'm going to see a lot of people I haven't seen in a long time. And hopefully I'll get to see you in person. And make sure to do that. Go to wealthformula.com and grab that $200 off coupon. I'm also going to be on some panels there as well. So it should be a lot of fun. And I really am excited about the content more than anything else, honestly. You know, it has been a great couple weeks here in Wealth Formula land. We had two big raises that are now completely funded, one for self-storage and another for my cryptocurrency fund. And these were open to accredited investors only, of course, because they were Regulation D506C. If participating in these kinds of things interests you and you are an accredited investor, make sure that you sign up for Investor Club at wealthformula.com. And I also want to just remind you, and I'm using this opportunity so since you feel bad for me that I have a cold, that you'll go to iTunes or Stitcher or whatever you're doing. And if you like this show, give us a 5-star review and subscribe to the show, of course, because that's what keeps our guest quality up. We have to show that people are listening, people like this show, and the way that you show that in cyber world is by showing your 5-star love. Anyway, that's it for me this week. This is Buck Joffrey with Wealth Formula Podcast signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.